Around, maybe quick introductions. Jesse, you want to start?
Sure. Jesse Iben, UH Hilo Entomology. I'm working on the Mauna Kea diversity project for 2 years now, and Vacu bug research before that. So, hello.
And me, Carrie Marks, member of the public.
Okay.
And Corey Harden, member of the public.
Public, cool. Jim Coyne-Kawa, Hawaiian Volcano Observatory.
Don Thomas, Center for Study of Active Volcanoes.
Fritz Klassner with Office of Mauna Kea Management.
Susan Cordell, U.S. Forest Service.
Ron Terry, ex-Mauna Kea Management Board member and co-founder of this version of the Environment Committee.
Stuart Hunter, Mauna Kea Observatory Support Services.
I'm Amber Stillman, and I'm Office of Mauna Kea Management.
I'm Jessica Kirkpatrick, Office of Mauna Kea Management.
Thanks, everybody, and welcome. So, I don't know how we feel about any sort of major revisions to today's discussion? No? No? Okay, going once, twice. So I had sent out a copy of the draft annual report and work plan, and my apologies, the draft stamp is on the last page only. One of the lovely features of Word. So if somebody wants a copy, does anybody want a copy? Keeping in mind that this is just, I have one more, I want to pass that one down that way, or actually here, we could, actually I don't need it, let's just do another one, that'll be fine. It's not final, so the main point of this so this is the report from 2012, what we accomplished in 2012, which is a whole year ago now, and I have a hard time remembering that when I write it. Thinking less about what actually we accomplished in that, because I have a hard time remembering what I did yesterday. But if the format works, we'll take it and basically strip out the content and redo it for 2013 here later this month. And then ultimately for the annual report portion, then that's what Stephanie can use for her report to the land board. Because she submits an annual report as part of the comprehensive management plan to the land board. And so that would allow, basically, do that draft annual report portion in February so that she has essentially the month of March to take out of it what she wants and use in the land board report. Likewise, there's the work plan, which the annual report is, and the land board reporting is by calendar year. Then the work plan is by state fiscal year of July 1st through June 30th or 31st, whatever it is. And for the 2014 fiscal year, which is what we're in right now, that means it started as of July 1st, 2013, so last July 1st, and runs through June 30th, this coming June 30th. So what we're doing now in this year. And likewise with that, there's still a little bit of flexibility in what happens in fiscal year 2014. But once, would like to just try and get this document finalized, move on, and then, so the next meeting would probably be more along the lines of, what's the term? Would be along the lines of reviewing the accomplishments from 2013. Just any thoughts or feedback on that. So, yeah. Any thoughts or initial reactions to this? How it works, doesn't work? There's still Jess and Amber had reviewed it too. They added a couple of things. I realized I left out one or two things, so there'll be a final version. But,
I have a couple of thoughts, and I may not have read it carefully enough, so forgive me if I've missed it. One is I'm still concerned about rapid response to invasive species, being sure that we have a plan in place, even if we don't know what the invasive species is going to be. I mean, the most likely is ants, but whatever else it is, we need to have a sense of how it's gonna be addressed rapidly so that it doesn't spread.
Yep.
And I think the more that that's in writing,
Yeah,
the more likely it is that we can put it in place quickly.
yeah.
The other thing is, I think that ever since 1982, the first management plans proposed involved vehicle washing, and I think that needs to be really codified in the plan to make sure that vehicle washing is a regular, intended practice, that there's consequences if it isn't done, you know, there's some sort of monitoring, there's a log, you know, something not too punitive, but certainly not something that we just ignore because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'm concerned about is petroleum spill response. You know, if there's a spill of a gas truck or a diesel truck on the mountain, how are we gonna deal with it? It needs to be more than paper towels in the back of a Ranger truck, which is what I was told was the response plan. You know, it's just not adequate. We need to have a serious petroleum response plan.
Yep. So I guess, not to be, I think that's a little bit, addressing all that is a little beyond, so this document wouldn't actually articulate a rapid response plan. It would say what we're doing in terms of progress for that.
Mhm.
Or likewise vehicle washing, or sort of the invasive species plan in general, or what we're doing in terms of preparing a spill response plan. This report would never really go provide the details of that.
No, it's not
Yeah.
supposed to, but we have to show intent. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not even in there as an intent, so,
Well,
at least
the-
as far as I can tell.
The invasive species plan, that is in there both in terms of what we did. So we have drafts for rapid response for arthropods, and we're working on one for plants. So we have a written draft. Kaz Vanderwood is working on the invasive species plan.
Great.
You know, we have a draft. We just, at this point, we're still bouncing it around enough that it's not ready to, it's not worth asking everyone's time to say, please review this. And that
Sure.
includes things like vehicle washing,
Okay.
inspections, rapid response. I think right now we have, in the case of rapid response, we have the arthropod draft in place, but we don't have a vegetation one in
Mhm.
place. But quite frankly, you know, if we had an issue with plants right now, I think arthropods is a little more novel in some ways, and that's why we focused on it, because
Mhm.
there's a lot of people out there that are used to dealing with plants in terms of
Right.
rapid response. So we started in an area where there wasn't that expertise. So yeah, that definitely is in there, and I don't know, maybe, you know, if that wasn't clear enough that that is something that's essentially our top priority, like in the budget section, it's
Okay.
like, it said that the first priority is to make sure that the invasive species plan
Mhm.
is making adequate progress. Beyond that, then time
Okay.
and and funds permitting, and it's more a matter of time, in my opinion, than money, is everything else that we need to know or think would be helpful to deal with. Haven't gotten too far into a spill response aspect of things, but that's certainly something that we can follow up on. I don't know, Stuart, if you have anything more to say on what I know all the facilities have spill
Right.
response plans as individual facilities.
Right.
Hey, you mentioned fuel trucks and things like
Right.
that going up. Nothing larger goes up above Vacu. Most of the emergency generators inside the facilities and the tanks are either have day tanks inside
Mhm.
or they're buried. That's just been covered with the State Department of Health underground storage tank.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah, that's right. So,
Okay, so there's a
So-
tank and the oil is in there now, the diesel or whatever is in there now?
inside, it'd be inside the observatory if they have the underground storage tank. Those are only for emergency generator use to
Right.
shut a facility down.
Yeah.
And then at Vacu, there's tanks. But the
Right.
larger vehicles, a large fuel truck, delivery truck does not go above Vacu.
Well, they must fill the diesel tanks from some point, you know, I mean, if there wasn't a power outage
They're
and
only
they used them.
up to 100 gallon, 200 gallon, and they
Okay.
simply use barrels.
Well, that's not what the TMT management plan says.
Well, that's not TMT, I'm talking about current
Currently,
use.
right, but I'm just concerned that they're planning to take commercial vehicles up there with diesel fuel, and at least it's the way I understood it, they were gonna phase out the barrels and use commercial for everything. If that's not true, maybe I'm out of date.
I can't, I don't know, I haven't actually seen anything yet.
Okay. It just seems like that's the purview of this committee, to be sure that there is a response plan.
Yes.
Yeah. No, and I just don't, I haven't done enough reading or research to be able to speak to that directly, so.
Okay.
I mean, that's certainly something we can come back to if we feel like it's worth coming back to, but I would, yeah, I basically have to go and sit here and start reading, and I don't wanna bore you with helping you read.
Okay, that's
So.
great.
I just have one concern that, in terms of the work plan, it might be helpful, given that we spent a lot of time on the management plan and putting it together, and we all kind of vowed it wasn't gonna be a document that collected dust in a corner. It would be nice to associate the work plan objectives with high priority needs in the management plan. And that would probably help Stephanie as well, because
Yeah.
she'll probably be required to use the management plan when she's reporting to the board.
Okay. And there is that sort of a section, after the work plan, there's a table of the
Right.
goals, the CMP goals, and then the NRMP goals.
Right.
We're tried to do that, and that's one of those things where I struggle.
Yeah, I know it's
had it in
challenging.
various different ways.
Sure.
And so I guess what I could use is help on exactly how to do that, because at the last minute I reformatted to that recurring and limited, because there's the CMP goals and then there's the NRMP
Sure.
goals, and by the time you tear down, my head starts to spin.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
It's very hard to read and put together, yes.
It's very hard to do, but it'd be nice to link it so that we can make sure that we're addressing those
Yeah.
highest priority.
Because the other sort of, I don't know, say issue, but I guess in my mind, some of the goals that are in the NRMP, just to speak to that, they're more, I don't think of them so much as goals. It's not that we don't do them, but it says make efficient use of resources. But those are sort of operating principles.
Sure.
They're not really goals you report to and you address, and what do we
But there are numerous data gaps that we still haven't addressed.
Yeah,
That's what I meant.
that
Sort of
absolutely,
Some
yeah.
of those high priorities.
Yeah, so, but then it's cherry picking goals that we want to include, and how do we go, and that's where I started to hang up, is how do I cherry pick goals from the NRMP and say, this is a goal that I want to say, that we talk about how we're working to address it, but this is a goal that I can ignore. And
Yeah.
without all of your input, I decided not to do that,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to arbitrarily be saying, I don't think this is appropriate as a goal. I think this is more, it's not that it's not important, it's not that it isn't any less relevant, it's just not a goal that you report to in this kind of a document. So the other thing that Steph had asked, and I don't know what I did to it or didn't do, but she had asked that there would be a matrix sort of in here of those sort of resource issues of geology, for instance, and hydrology, and has the inventory been done? Is the monitoring plan in place? And what other research issues are there that we have identified? So I thought I had that, it's obviously not in there, so either I deluded myself into thinking I had done it and never did it, or, so that's something that would add for next year. But I mean, I can, if everyone's okay with me sort of picking out goals that we actually want to, what goals does that invasive species management plan address, for instance? I can do that, but I would probably just flat out ignore some of them, like, is it an efficient use of resources? Because otherwise it just kind of, to my mind, seems like it's padding the importance of everything. Because everything is, I mean, some of those would basically just say, yeah, we thought about that. But it doesn't really have any, it's more just a way, something, a process that you make sure you work through and think about, is it efficient? Is it, in my mind, is it efficient, rather than saying this goal addresses efficient use of resources, or this goal.
Well, it's helpful if it's quantifiable, for
Yeah.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's some metric you can evaluate it.
So, I guess that was my. Sorry, Fred.
What are you doing?
I don't. How you doing, Fred? So, any other thoughts on the?
I just wanted to clarify, the next one of these reports would probably be more like June or something?
Yeah, so basically the next, I would expect that I'll be drafting the next annual report, we'll be drafting the next annual report later this month and in February, so that by the next time we have a meeting, which is, if we keep our regular schedule, is 2 months from now, we will have a more or less full draft of the annual report. And just have to figure out how quickly we can put together the work plan for fiscal year 2015 and get some feedback on it, so there'd be more time for meaningful discussion and input about the fiscal year 2015 work plan. So yeah, that would be, I don't recall what the date, I said in there at the, I think at the beginning of the work plan, the work plan and the annual report section, what sort of the expected time frame would be.
Okay, you did, you're right.
I don't recall exactly what it is, other than I know the annual report one is basically, I mean, Jess and Amber and I had talked about finishing this up, this whole document up by roughly within the next week or two, and then immediately switching into the 2013 annual report. And then as soon as, and that's basically by the end of February, and then it immediately rolls into work plan. But I don't recall what is having in there precisely.
I see it now.
Okay. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah?
Just a general comment, not knowing the details, but I'm just kind of horrified that after 30 years on the mountain, there's still apparently not a rapid response plan for invasive species, and apparently not an adequate plan for, oil spills and so forth. And that's a very general comment, and I know you guys all work very hard, but just, the amount of money going into telescopes on top of there and the little that goes into resources, horrifies me. So, thanks.
And to add on to that, I'm wondering what the plan is for getting the vehicle washing stations up and going after 30-some years of waffling on that.
In terms of having a vehicle wash station at Halepohaku?
No, having it before Halepohaku.
Before Halepohaku?
We don't want the vehicles to get up to Halepohaku and then wash the bugs all off on the ground there.
Yeah.
It could be, I suppose, down at the Saddle Road turnoff. But ideally, you would have them on the lowlands, one on the Kona side and one on the Hilo side, so that the invasive species wouldn't have a chance to get up there. This recommendation has been made for 30 years and is included in the comprehensive management plan.
So right now, the invasive species management plan sort of agreement that we're working with between BISC and the Hawaii Ant Lab includes evaluating that and looking at how we might
No, I want to know the time schedule. You've been evaluating it for 30-some years. Let's get some action.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know that we have a time schedule for something
Well, let's by the next meeting have one.
So otherwise, moving along to sort of the inventory and monitoring type of and sort of research type topics. Let's see if I can pull up our webpage. We had the research catalog that we had worked on in the past is on the website. We'll want to, and I think the name, the name got changed after, sort of in the process of reviewing, but it's up on the website. And, sorry, my computer's not been videoing well lately. So it's up what we've, I think it's referred to as research interests now. At any time, if anybody has suggestions on it, feel free to take a look at the files that are on there, edit them, and send comments to me. And otherwise, we should I guess it was envisioned that we would periodically, whether that's every year or every other year or some frequency, revisit that list of research interests and the priorities. Hopefully we can slowly figure out how to incorporate the priorities from the natural resource management plan into that set of documents. See if this thing survives. My computer sometimes dies when I connect it to it. Nope, there it goes. So this is the webpage with the research interests. And skipping over the introduction, which I think we talked about, it has things organized by broad categories, concept of an inventory, in monitoring, and then potential research. And so with that, we've got, it's not complete. I think there's still some things, in looking at it and reviewing it, there are things that we'll probably find that are, what's the word, that are priorities that either hadn't been identified previously or are just that we had somehow overlooked, and we can keep adding to that kind of stuff. But it's up there, and I guess the point of just mentioning this is figuring out how to make better use of, how to make better use of this. I think at this point it's a little bit incomplete enough to try and say that we should just solely this would drive a lot of decisions. I think we still need to, we'll always still need to refer back to the overall management plan and just look at what else is happening. For example, my understanding is the Fish and Wildlife Service is likely to list bandrum storm petrel as endangered or threatened in the next year or two. There's no evidence of any seabird activity, real seabird activity up on the mountain, but the effort in terms of looking hasn't been as intense as desirable either.
There have been reports, but very small reports.
Yeah, I talked to the PTA staff about what they've been seeing, and in terms of bandrum storm petrel in particular, they have a 5-year breeding return cycle coming back from the ocean, and they only tend to do it when it's not a full moon, because avoiding predators. So and in 5 years they found one night where they heard about 15 minutes of calls from that species. And that's a huge amount of data, and in their case they were able to drive to all their sites. If we limited it to where we could drive to sites for 5 years, it's a kind of a mind-numbing amount of work to just to maybe find one night after 5 years of, or one instance of a bird call after 5 years of trying. So
But we've never tried.
but we've never, there hasn't, well, I guess I don't know that the university has ever tried. I can speak to that, but I mean, there have been others that have looked over the years. And exactly where, example there is the USGS has been doing bat research on Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. We've helped work with them, provided support where we could. But they didn't feel that it was necessary to go up real high because there's no, Jesse's light trapping, for instance, up high, he doesn't get anything at night worth, as I understand it, nothing at night to really would attract bats in the first place.
Yeah, there's no difference between just wind intercept and those UV light traps we put up, because there's no real directive activity of insects at that point.
Anybody done any sonic work?
That's what the USGS is mostly doing now, is sonic work. And so they're doing it sort of in the Halepohaku vicinity and lower, but they're not, there's not, from their perspective, there's not really any scientific justification to be up at 13,000 feet
Sure.
with sonic, listening for bat sounds when
Yeah,
the
there's-
food source isn't up there.
Yeah.
That isn't to say that there isn't a bat that occasionally flies by. So, anyway, that other aspect of this that I think would be nice is for the 2015 work plan, especially, would be to figure out how can we make this useful with, in terms of UH-ELO being an undergraduate research institution, and find ways to bring undergraduates into helping giving undergraduate research opportunities. That will require a little bit of effort just to make sure that it's something that's technically feasible within sort of state and UH system rules and law and state law and UH system rules. But hopefully this is something that we can work with the various UH faculty and community college faculty as a way of providing research opportunities and learning opportunities for students. So, the other thing for 2014 is on the back of this agenda. Been asking around for trying to figure out what we should do for, what are some of the more pressing issues up on the mountain at present. We have an invasive species plan. That hopefully at the next meeting we can start. Hopefully Kaz will be available for the next meeting. I sent him an email earlier this week asking if we could talk about having that be focus at the next meeting. But we'll see if that's where his schedule and progress allow. I think we're okay on progress, but schedules are another matter. Looking at erosion, that was a priority in the comprehensive management plan, erosion issues. It's also related, not so much erosion, but the subsurface, the substrate is a priority for understanding habitat according to Grant's vegetation inventory, Grant Garrish's vegetation inventory. That was one of his recommendations, was looking at substrate and understanding arthropod habitat as well. So new UH-ELO faculty, Dr. Ryan Peroy was interested, went up with Jesse and talked a little bit about what's up there. This is sort of a rough initial first cut at a proposal that he was interested in, understanding and having read we gave him the management plan and the CMP and the natural resource management plan, and otherwise went up on the mountain and talked bugs and subsurface substrate and a little bit about vegetation. So these are some of the research questions that he came back with after doing that. So again, resources permitting, this is something that we'll probably try and pursue in this fiscal year. There still is some funding. I've been trying to talk with some of the faculty about doing some additional vegetation work, following up on grants, some of the grant suggestions, but that's been a little slow in coming, but hopefully that will happen. That's Abby Tetris, also here at UH-ELO. And then the seabird inventory is another thing, but in some of this, we'd like it to be a little more of a group discussion to figure out how we prioritize, and then Jessica and Amber and I can go back and try and make it happen with the various, especially the university faculty. So, any thoughts on either? I know this is just all of 2 minutes to look at this.
What is the status of the vegetation plan? Is that?
The vegetation plan is on our website. It's done. We haven't actually. Can we get to that? But we can do it now. Yeah, it was in the sort of the monthly summary that I sent out at one point. But it's up on the website. It's a PDF file. There's a low and a high resolution version, and then a couple different formats of the actual data. And the Fish and Wildlife Service was working on some species distribution stuff, so we sent this to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Do you remember when we finished this handbook? Was it a month? It was in it was last year.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think.
November.
Yeah, was it November?
Yeah.
So at this point, has anybody actually looked at this?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I want to do that.
I don't think we've
Yeah, I
had
thought we
one.
were still waiting for it.
No, no,
We did.
yeah.
I
no,
missed
I-
the last meetings.
So, yeah, it's up, it's online. Yeah, if you're reading it and you notice, all I can say is Grant was threatening to be done with it, whether we were done with it or not, because he was tired of working on it. And we kept finding typos or formatting issues or data questions to go back. And so if you are reading it and see something that you have a question about, please let us know. And we'll work, I mean, Grant's he's always very helpful to work with, but we just really wanted to see it done too. So, it's up there. If you do notice anything, please let us know. But the data's there. And Grant did everything in Excel, so the data's in the Excel format that we prepared it in, but it's also there in various, a personal geodatabase format. We have it as a shape file depending on what you can ingest. And he also, he prepared, just as a note, he prepared 2 reports. One is all the data that he collected. And the other is a second report that's just focusing on the astronomy precinct, that summit area and the surrounding buffer. So he analyzed a subset of the data. And there are some changes because in doing it, he found some of the naming conventions had changed. So rather than put both up there and say, well, you found this species in the astronomy precinct in this report, and don't say that you found it in this other report. We just have a note up there that if you want it, let us know, and we can explain that, rather than cause confusion. But if there is a second report that's looking at just the astronomy precinct.
One of the things that he said was there wasn't a single transect where he didn't find mammalian frass. So is there any plan for doing any, monitoring of sheep, goats, pigs? I saw a pig on the R1 road yesterday. And so obviously there was hyacinth HP, much higher, but there are obviously other mammals up there or he wouldn't have found frass. So it seems like we need to be at least aware of the monitoring or control.
Yeah, we, unfortunately, no one from DLNR is here today, because that, most of what we've been saying, because, hunting is such a contentious issue.
It is. But maybe there needs to be paid hunters. Maybe there needs to be trapping. It's hard. There may be other ways other than just allowing more hunting.
Yeah, no, I think, the fence is definitely coming along too, that DLNR is putting in their aerial hunting. The last Mauna Kea Watershed Alliance meeting that I went to, they're really bringing down the numbers of ungulates on Mauna Kea, and that's where the Forest Restoration Project is the entity that's doing that monitoring, and that's where I just don't know the numbers.
Okay.
What the other part of that is that I don't know is what's the lifespan of frass once it's left first deposited.
Sure.
Because it is so
Probably
dry.
carbon dated up there.
Yeah.
You're welcome to. Happy to work with you if you want to collect samples. But yeah, you do definitely see it up there, but it's so dry that I would think that it would last a very long time. Just, some of that, it may be fresh, but it may be 5 or 10 years old. I really have no idea. I don't think anyone's ever looked at how long something survives before it's unrecognizable.
Good question. Worth looking into. Be a good grad student project.
Yeah.
One of those grad students that sticks around for a long time.
That's willing to.
Well, if you can carbon date it, it might be worth doing. Give it a try.
There's lots of room in that project for bad jokes about pooping in the woods.
Yeah. We could at least ask Ryan Peroy if if they want to do any soils work, that's a lot of stuff that I want to know too, is really what is the nutrient input up there. And, if it's part of something else that might happen, just to, as an example, here's how long we know this frass was sitting there. Like, I know I write it down when I'm on out in the field too, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because Ryan's expertise, right now he's in Kosovo working on a European Union project looking at heavy metal contamination.
Yeah.
It's not, his interest is professional interest in erosion, but it's a much broader background than just purely the geomorphology. That he might be able to contribute to that.
Fritz, you were mentioning fence line. Whereabout are you referring to?
That is the fence line that goes around at the 8,000-foot level, the Mauna Kea Forest Restoration.
8,000? Okay.
Roughly speaking, it's the one that if you're going up the mountain, when you cross the cattle guard.
Okay.
So
I was hiking on glacial moraines on the Pohakaloa side of the Skyline Drive, and I know I got up to 11,000, and there was fresh droppings, round goat-like, as opposed to pig droppings. And then we came across a carcass of a sheep, and I took the head and the horns home. So, and I think it was the mouflon type.
Sure.
So those things get up to 11,000, and it'd probably be just a little bit more before they bump into, the science reserve.
Yeah.
And there's no fences that would prohibit them from doing that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely no fence above that forest restoration project.
Right.
There is no fence. And there may be little pieces here and there from other past DLNR projects.
Right.
Otherwise.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions, or are we sort of ready to go in, sort of launch into the brief update side of this, or any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So we'll just run through the agenda. Part of this is just standing items so that I don't forget, or we don't forget to talk about stuff. But Jess, if you want to.
You have a spare agenda?
You
that's
can have mine. Oh, wait, is that the pile?
About 10.
There you go.
So Jess, if you want to talk about invasive species plan.
Okay, so the invasive species plan is coming along. Just to reiterate the main sections, that includes prevention, monitoring of new invasive species, monitoring of established invasive species, control of established invasive species, and rapid response. The monitoring and control sections are organized by location, so astronomy precinct, HP, boundaries, and natural areas. And at the last meeting, we also discussed the rapid response section of it, and we're talking about the processes after we discover a species, who we contact, the kinds of things that we do. So we are working towards it.
Great.
As far as invasive species implementation, we're still continuing facility monitoring for arthropods, and we added outside traps to our facility monitoring, and the outside traps are placed quarterly, and we added the outside traps because we have ants at HP, so we're trying to see if maybe we can capture them in outside traps. And then we also are planning to add to the facility monitoring a weed pool once a month around, just right around the facilities, because that's where we find fireweed, or that's where we find the ants, is in the fireweed.
I brought some of those ants. If you want to see how small they are, this is, can't remember the name, Jess. Cardiocondyle kagutsuchi.
They prefer that habitat, the fireweed, or
Yeah,
they're associated with
They seem to be associated with the invasive plants.
Oh, lovely.
In the root mats.
Yeah, with mealybugs. And we have a science fair student who was also looking at how effective our standard baits were for this. And she at least found so far that peanut butter is not attractive to these ants, whereas that's what they use for little fire ants and everything else. But as long as we mix the food, the different protein, sugar, and fats like we typically do, it seems that it's still attractive, but just not very much so. So they're a very odd little ant, which is part of the problem why we didn't detect them. But they're all over Mauna Road. They're just moving up slowly. But they're very small.
And just a note on that ant, the Fish and Wildlife Service found them at Hakalau and all along Mauna Road back in 2008. And from everybody we've talked to, they've probably been up there on the mountain for a number of years. And nobody really knows how they got up the mountain, but we haven't found them above HP.
Mhm.
And then we're still continuing swarm trap monitoring. No new colonies of honeybees have been established this past year. And we are also trying to find an effective baiting system that can be placed inside of the facilities to reduce the risk at the source. These baiting systems would be placed inside of places like HP, the Viz, and Hilo facilities. CAS has recommended max force complete, and so we're kind of trying it in the office to see how it works.
Just, can you tell me if the OMKM has responded to the Department of Transportation plan about putting in a site near the Mauna Kea park that they would use their equipment on as they go up the hill, since there's Argentine ants at that park?
I have not had a chance to review it yet.
So that was an EA environmental assessment that the state was completed and accepted, that there'd be a.
But there still needs to be a letter addressing that, I
Yeah,
think.
so there's something called that DOT has a Saddle Road Task Force for Invasive Species that we go to those meetings. We haven't written, to my knowledge, a formal letter, but we have been talking with DOT and we participate in the task force discussions regarding invasive species issues along the Saddle Road that the
Right.
DOT has.
I just want to be really sure that equipment doesn't go up the hill with ants on it. You know, if there's no
Yeah.
washing station anywhere between Kona and Hilo and the summit, then there's no way of cleaning that equipment.
Yeah.
Well, actually, nothing is allowed to go up without it being inspected first. So they would not be able to come on our land unless we inspected it first.
DOT doesn't have any responsibility for the maintenance of that. In fact, the county has responsibility from the access road to Heliquat for maintenance. And then the MKSS University does above there, so no DOT equipment would be up.
Well, that's a relief, thank you.
The DOT did say in there, though, that was part of their justification, was staging for the Summit Access Road in
Yeah.
their EA, but they don't have.
Zero.
They have no responsibility.
Zero responsibility. Well, that's a relief, okay.
Is there anybody looking at the DLNR equipment? Because they routinely scrape and repair R1 from Halepohaku all the way around at about 8,000 feet to Pu'ula'au. Because I see them do that every year. And then Mauna Road is also cleared, and I know that a lot of that is DHHL land. But who brings the equipment up for that? Is anybody keeping track of that?
I've not seen, they've not parked any of the equipment at Halepohaku or asked us to use that, so I don't have any knowledge of
Yeah, I've
Seem
seen
to
the
keep a lot of it
equipment.
up there, and pull it out anyway, they
Yeah.
keep the equipment up there.
Mhm.
Right, that's where I've seen the equipment.
Yeah.
And I know there was discussions about when the last iteration of Mauna Road, there was discussions about consolidating the work because it passes from DHHL.
Correct.
to-
Yeah.
And so they were trying to coordinate that to save on expenses, save on time involved, minimize the movement of equipment and stuff. But yeah, other than sort of the Watershed Alliance and sort of things like task force meetings, those are our primary ways
Yeah.
of participating in those discussions.
Yeah, I hope you're aware, that there was at some point in earlier years attempts to get rid of gorse. And so there were private companies that brought in equipment to carbonize, bulldoze, carbonize the gorse. And I know there was a lot of equipment that was brought up there, and I presume ultimately it was unsuccessful and they took all their equipment down.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice that you folks are the only scientists keeping an ear on what's going on the mountain. It'd be nice to input and awareness to other endeavors about invasives and potential
Including
invasives.
DHHL.
Yeah. They're right up against the boundaries.
any other invasive species? Type? Okay, thank you. The item B under the brief updates, last, 2013, we did a couple silver sword outplantings in the DLNR enclosure when they had plants that they needed to get planted and wanted to put them there. So hopefully, basically the only mention is hopefully they will have some of that again this year. They made some initial indications that might be the case, and if so, we'll do that. Lake Pohaku is a lot drier than the other places where the state does outplanting, so we watered for 6-7 months.
Oh, wow.
And finally said enough, it's winter at the end of the calendar year. So
But we're still gonna check up on them.
yes, we won't just abandon Jessica's babies.
Thank you.
So, but hopefully we'll be able to keep doing that kind of thing with DLNR, but that's really because most of that work is on DLNR land, that's largely up to them. For us to do it part of this invasive species management plan for us our understanding is it will require site plan approval under conservation district rules. And that would apply also to restoration. So anything that covers more than an acre under conservation district rules requires site plan approval when it's restoration or invasive species control. So that's part of the invasive species management plan. All right. Moving on then to the sort of the various projects and inventory monitoring research. We'll just mention the vegetation report. It's done. Sorry if we weren't clear about that enough before, but it's up. It's online. If you have any glitches, please let us know, because this is, you're the first ones. Be the first ones besides Fish and Wildlife Service to really use it. So if you have any issues with using the data or understanding what's up there, let us know, and we'll work with Grant, or if it's just a simple format issue that we can fix, we'll do that. Otherwise, Jesse, just going roughly in order.
Yeah, can we pull up that, just to show some pictures? So as far as the arthropod research that I am doing, I've been doing for a long time. I usually bring dead things to show. Finally, here's a live thing. So this is the Mauna Kea Summit spider. So Fred, probably want to see that too. And we finally found a guy who actually works on Lycosa as well, other than Frank Howarth, who's been doing a lot of work from McGill University in the Arctic, discussing basically what the Lycosa fauna is throughout all of Arctic Canada. And it's really interesting that on Mauna Kea we've got endemic Lycosa wolf spider and Linnaeus sheetlip spiders, and that's essentially all of the diversity and biomass in Arctic Canada and Russia. So it's an interesting genetic predisposition or some kind of behavioral predisposition to those groups to also survive and have endemicity at the summit of Mauna Kea. Like, we don't see any happy-faced spiders. That lineage doesn't seem to be adapted well to be able to survive up there. So I'll go give a quick overview of just what I talked about at the ESA meeting in December when I was trying to find some of these specialists to help me identify these 230 species that we're trying to identify. So I'll just go through it real quick this is kind of a general arthropod update. This is also what I'm putting in with Fritz and Jess for the annual report. So it's basically our update from 2012, which was a full year ago now. So it's about half the data which we're getting into the annual report, which I have a draft email that I need to send to Fritz probably by the end of the day. All right, so just, and some of this many of you might have seen before, but just to go through real quickly, for those of you who I don't know very well, I have been working on this with Dan Rubinoff since 2012. Now I'm working at UH Hilo, but still continuing on this project. So the students from the general entomology class are helping me actually sort insects that we collect on Mauna Kea, and so we're actually getting quite a few more people other than just Jess and my student assistants Marlena and Nikki and Kalena, who actually know the fauna up there. So we're getting more people at least who hopefully when the state can actually do more invasive species monitoring, they'll actually know the difference between something endemic flag something new or something already known as invasive, because that's part of our taxonomic barrier. You guys all know this. So here's from the management plan, the kind of management people or areas that we have to work with. But a lot of our inventory and monitoring is around this road corridor around Halipohaku. In this area for where there are plants, and then different types of sampling and monitoring in the alpine stone desert, because it's so much larger and sampling techniques are different up there. So like we all know, food webs are part of reality and ecosystems. So overall, there's about 25 endemic plants and 25 introduced plants. And now I have to go through Grant's botany survey and redo all of my GIS samples, because I've used his draft information of where he said all these plants were. So I was actually going back to where his sites were to find plants and look for the insects on those plants. So again, we have these two studies that can overlap, and that way in the future, for more effective monitoring, we at least have some locations we can revisit, or we can randomize and do completely new ones, and that's per my analysis. So this is what we're doing with OMCAM help. I mean, often Jess and Fritz and Amber will help me as well, just as I'm up there looking for invasive species for them too, but we're looking at transects in the alpine desert, time substrate surveys, also pitfall traps, like our standard baited pitfall traps for vacu bugs and wind intercept traps. We're trying to get more data about what is actually kind of falling out of the sky and whether or not those are surviving, or if they're just food for the native insects and some introduced insects that seem to be surviving up there all year long. And then we have this randomized survey by plant type in the alpine areas and in the subalpine areas. So we do all these different sampling techniques, which is then what we go through in the lab to see which sampling types on which plants. We find different diversity metrics so that hopefully later on we'll be able to hand over to OMCAM, and if I can continue to do this for research, there's still really neat stuff up there. We can at least be more efficient about how all of this survey protocols can be done. So we're using a basic kind of biodiversity metric statistical analysis just to look at how many species are there and whether or not it seems like we're really capturing all of the rare species, even given all of our different sampling types. So, as we all know, before basically Fred Stone and some friends, we're looking at the alpine environment in the late 70s, early 80s. It was kind of described as barren and lifeless, even though as entomologists we always know there's got to be something up there. This is some aeolian debris in the snow. And essentially everything here is introduced. These are syrphid flies, parasitic wasps. This is just stuff that is fallen in the snow. We tried to assess kind of the density of bugs in the snow, but it's so variable that we don't have good data on that. But you don't just need snow. In the rocks themselves, all of these bugs will also fall out of the sky and feed the other insects that are up there. And there's the vacu bug, this picture I've been showing for years. These are the baited pitfall traps. We've actually used quite a few different types of attractant baits. From the Bishop Museum, they always used one brand. We've used a couple of different brands of shrimp baits as well as tuna. All seem to be equally attractive to vacu bugs, but again, the variability is so extreme. But as long as it smells like something kind of dead, vacu bugs will always get into that trap and stay trapped. This is some of the other stuff we find. This is these two new species of Agrotis, again, which was known from Mauna Kea for a long time, but there's finally a noctuid specialist at Manoa who's actually describing these species. So we're actually, getting info, not just for species descriptions, but how often we find the larvae and pitfall traps, and the adults, which we regularly encounter from about 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Flying around Mauna Kea. But again, that's why we did the UV light traps. They're not active at night. So that's a really cool thing for noctuid nocturnal moths. The Mauna Kea endemics, probably just because it's too cold, have kind of adapted not to fly around at night where usually moths do. So here they are as adults. This one is quite pretty. I like it a lot better. It's very small for noctuids. It's only about 1 inch across. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago on Mauna Kea, or on campus, I've been going through the teaching collection, and we found one from 1980 of this species from Mauna Kea by Mr. White. I don't know who that is. I have to figure it out. But so they have been collected since 1980, but still is a new species. So also we're working on whether or not this is truly an endemic centipede. Also the species of sheet web spiders. I finally got this guy at McGill University who I'll send these to, who can help me identify them. The specimen of spider that I'm passing around was collected last year with Cynthia King, actually at Lake Waiau. So it's over a year old and is still molting and growing. It's not yet an adult. So yeah, they can be quite long-lived, as spiders can be, but it's good to get some of this life history info as well, not just the structures of how to tell them apart. So we're getting capture rates by effort, and we're getting data on immatures versus adult ratios of lots of these creatures. So again, more information to monitor these will at least know what we should expect to see in the future. And then the lower elevation work around Halepohaku, which I find is quite diverse. I like it, maybe because I can tell what all the plants are there. But we've cataloged about 8,000 arthropods, 230 morphospecies. We have about a quarter of these ID'd species so far, and we just started determining labels on those this week. So we have at least 4 new species that I know are new, but there's going to be probably quite a few more. And we've got a few taxonomy technicians who are great at working on Mauna Kea. Okay. This is more of the data we have by plants and by seasons, abundances, and we have data on nymphs versus adults. So again, different plants, you get different reproductive bouts, different seasonalities of what you find on different plants in different areas. These spikes are mostly aphids, and again, it seems like this new ant is associated with senecio and primrose along the roads at least, but we haven't really found it out in the environment far away from the road. Here's some of the neat insects. We have quite a few flightless groups, which I think is really interesting for restoration. I've talked to Cheyenne Perry and some of the restoration folks about whether or not they're outplanting all these great Mauna Kea plants, but I have looked for the insects that I usually find at least around Halepohaku, and we don't find them in the outplant sites. So not only are they keeping out the invasive species, they're also keeping out the native species, which can't fly. So it's going to be hard to get there, at least in this group. These are neat leafhoppers. All throughout the world, these are only grass feeders, yet in Hawaii, they don't feed on any grasses, and they feed on just about every Hawaiian lineage of plant. So one of those great oddball cases of Delphacids. Chenopodium, again, kind of broadly distributed, but this is one of the close relatives of the Vacu bug. Mycius terrestris and Sinocetus. You can see it feeding on those very dry, very small seeds. They mostly feed on the ground when these seeds fall on the ground. Stonogeny Microfila seems to be well associated, I've lost my pointer, with Hylaeus bees. If you can see it, I showed this before, but there's holes in this flower of the Stonogeny on the right where honeybees have actually nectar robbed because they can't fit into the Stonogeny. So the honeybees are not helping pollinate our native mint up there. Fruit flies, Tifridid fruit flies again are associated with Dubautias, as well as silver swords, and I'm trying to give these specimens to some people who have worked on some that have they've found on silver swords just to see if they are the same species or if they really are relegated to Dubautias versus the silver swords themselves. Other species of moths, probably grass feeding associated, and missing my pointer still, but in the upper right is another flightless Thyrocopa moth. We have quite a few specimens of that. These are flightless, and then there are some flighted species as well. Highest elevation records of just about every insect we find up there, just because no one else looks. So it's really neat to find them up about 10,500 feet, wherever there's a few little sprigs of shrubs or grasses. this was a great catch that actually Fritz's group found when we were up there with some AmeriCorps volunteers. Found one specimen of Micromis usingeri, which is another flightless lacewing. You can see a normal lacewing in the upper right. The lower left is the specimen that they found on Mamane. It's the 8th specimen known throughout history. They're also found on Hualalai, as far as we know. And yeah, other interesting things, native bark louse, other plant bugs, orthotylus, which is a new species, Dan Poemus says, but he describes species all the time, so he's not surprised. As our case study from Mamane, this seems to have lots of diversity. It is a dominant plant there, so we have lots and lots of samples from Mamane, but we have got quite a bit of diversity that's only found in Mamane, not on any other plants, which is what we're finding on all of our other plants as well, which is typical for insects. And then we have much less insects on our introduced plants and essentially no native insects on our introduced plants, feeding on them regularly. This white-crossed seed bug in the upper right does feed on Senecio. It's the only thing I've found that immatures as well, feeding on Senecio, so it actually might be reducing the seed bank a little bit. They feed on seeds that fall as well. So a good introduced species maybe. This is our diversity metrics from some of the samples. Again, this is kind of rough data because these aren't organized by actual final identifications, but what we would like to see is a perfectly leveling off after about 80 samples or so, so that we can say, hey, look, we found most of the diversity we're going to find. But by and large, what this is telling us is we need at least 40 samples, and these are individual branch beats, so 5 per tree. So, you know, what we're getting is information of how many trees to hit, look for bugs, how many times, so that we can have a pretty good estimate of the diversity that we find now. So we look again in the future, we can compare it back to now and have statistical rigor. So we're working on this diversity survey plan for OMCAM. That's what I should have probably. I think originally on the grant was 2013, but I didn't actually start till 2012, and it's a 3 or 4 year grant. So probably 2015 is when I should have these recommendations pretty well sorted out. And it'll be an interactive database, so if something in the future becomes endangered, my example are the Hylaeus bees, we at least can look at how often and where we found bees. So if you're looking for those Hylaeus specifically, you know how to find them, at what times and what seasons. We have not yet found any of those candidate endangered species. It's mostly a pretty common Hylaeus volcanicus. And of course, ants is our greatest immediate threat as far as we can tell. So we've actually added ant surveys whenever we're just doing our general biodiversity surveys. That's something we hadn't done before because there were no ants before. So we're adding that whenever we go out as well. And lots of people help. Most people are in this room. And hopefully that was quick enough.
Jesse?
Yeah.
Who put out the traps using the cockroach bait at the test drilling site for the TMT?
Oh, that would have been us.
You guys
Bisque,
did that
it's
for-
us and Bisque. So
Yeah.
part of
Okay.
our facility trap method that we worked up is a hoi-hoi or a sticky trap with an attractant. So it's not actually killing anything, it's just capturing it so we can identify it. And then if we have an issue, we know what's up there.
Any data from that?
Nothing new as far as
Yeah. I've gone through the stuff because it's with Bisque, so they bring samples to Jessica and myself. They have a new person working with them, Marty, who we're trying to get enough training to so she can say, oh, okay, that's something we've seen before, it's not a threat, or it's at least something that if it is a threat, we have seen it before or not. But we've gone through all of her samples, or at least I went through a big set of them just to use my eyes on them. And we haven't found anything new that we haven't found before in pitfall traps, because we haven't used those sticky cards. We tried to use sticky traps before up there, but they weren't shielded from the dust. They just get covered with dust in a day, and they were ineffective.
Yeah,
So
I
they
saw
are-
the plastic
Yeah, I mean,
lids you guys are using.
it's trying to work with what we have up there and still have kind of a constant effort. And we know that, we are getting the same things on those sticky cards that we get kind of in our pitfall traps as well. And that, I always like data, so I'm getting this stuff and we'll put it all together really see if that's an effective way to monitor or if there's a better way. But for right now, it seems like a pretty good effort.
How long was the test run?
Well, they're constantly doing it.
It's still there? There's
Yeah.
still traps
Yeah,
monitored?
they do it weekly, yeah.
Great.
They've switched, since there's no longer
Mhm.
any real activity, they've switched to monthly, but, I mean, it's basically the same procedures that Jessica does at all the other facilities.
Mhm.
It's just, given that there isn't really a facility there, it's just the site, we're getting a baseline before
Mhm.
before anything goes in.
Mhm. Have they stopped drilling? Is that why you guys lessened the?
Yeah,
The,
TMT
frequency.
there hasn't been any activity there for a couple of months.
Okay, because I know there were bulldozers up there, and I visited a couple times.
Yeah, their equipment's still parked on
Yeah.
the side of the road. They're right outside the SMA, or right alongside the SMA road, but otherwise they
Okay,
haven't been out of the
great.
site.
It was nice seeing the traps there.
Yeah. I'm glad that somebody else is going through them. Yeah, so it's good that they're getting some training, and then if there's something weird, we did find some very small flightless wasps that were introduced for controlling of black widow spider egg sacs, which is again, there were enough of them. They just look like little specks of dirt, but once you get them under the scope, we think they're genus bias, which is the introduced ones, but. We have a collaborator who's a specialist on these kinds of moths or wasps, and going to send them to him, and he's going to tell us whether or not they really are host specific. Because if they're attacking the native spider, that's another problem. But again, a control method for a microscopic flightless wasp, it's not feasible. They're all throughout the state, but it's interesting that they're up at the summit of Mauna Kea. They're so small, they probably just
Got
fall out
blown
the
up.
wind. Yeah, with everything else.
Yeah, with everything else.
Yep.
Thanks, that was cool.
So I have a real quick note on climate in that another one of, it's come up in another context in terms of paucity of climate data up there. So we've been working with Tom Giambaluca and a graduate student of his to figure out how we can take advantage of mostly the existing things that are already out there and ensure that we're getting a good climate record.
Including precipitation?
Yes, including precipitation. So hopefully we can come back to that at a future time, so.
Okay.
Don, did you have something?
Well, I didn't really have anything formal. If you have the figures,
Yeah.
You can bring those up and just.
Get this thing to cooperate.
I was curious about the anomalies. It sounds kind of interesting.
Well, okay, this is the whole B2, and I didn't get a response back from you. Is that the one that water was put into?
I'd have to look at the map,
Okay,
but I
it's
probably was.
The further one in.
Oh, the further one in? No, we
Yeah.
did the closest one in.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for those of you who are not familiar with this, we put in 2 strings of thermistors to monitor the temperature in a couple of the geotechnical holes. And we've been monitoring since the end of October with the intent of number one, determining if there was evidence of permafrost up there in that region, and number two, to give us some baseline data on subsurface temperatures that could potentially be used over the long term, looking at climate change impacts. And in this particular hole, okay, again, we've got thermistors at 50 feet, 40 feet, 30, and 20. And temperatures were showing a progressive decline. The reason for that is that these boreholes were cased, the casing was cemented, and the cementing exercise does impart some heat to the formation, and so the temperatures in the holes were somewhat above their natural ambient temperatures when we put the thermistors in. And what we're seeing is a progressive decline in temperature. Now, some of this may also be seasonal, but we really would need to continue monitoring for a longer period on that. But let's see. Interesting thing that we see in the 50-foot depth is sort of a relatively rapid decrease and a much greater temperature drop in the deeper part of that hole than in the shallower parts of the hole. And it's possible that there may have been just more cement to seal the bottom of that casing, and it's just taking a longer period of time for it to equilibrate. But it looks like we're approaching an equilibrium temperature in the deepest thermistor of about 42.2 Fahrenheit, and that's sufficiently warm that it doesn't appear that there is any permafrost in this region. So the temperatures are looking pretty much the way you would expect them. The shallower temperatures are somewhat warmer. At the end of the warm season, we'll see what happens as the temperature, sort of natural temperature variation occurs. We'll keep these in as long as we can. If you want to go to the next one.
Do you know what the substrate material was before cementing, Don?
We do have cores, and we don't have them in hand right now. They were collected for the geotechnical work. They're going to be looking at compressibility and so forth, but we'll get those cores back, and as soon as we get those back, we'll have those essentially imaged and described and characterized, and that information will be available, but I don't have it off the top of my head right now.
So you don't know if it was cinder as opposed to basalts?
At the 50-foot depth, I don't know that.
Yeah.
But they did see a pretty variable morphology in the drilling. I mean, there was some cinder, there was some what looked like some what looked like ahoy-like. So it's a highly variable stratigraphy through the depths of those holes. Now, this one, and again, I haven't had a chance to talk. I plotted these up this morning. We got the data yesterday. Did anything happen in hole B6? I mean, was that?
That's the one that, so there was some weird data coming out, and so thinking that there might be a cold air ponding effect in the empty hole, so we put just tap water in the hole, and that's the spike. And you can see that is, so that's the hole that that's definitely it. Because that's the time matches up, or the date matches up, and yeah, that totally looks like poured some water in.
Yeah. Okay. I was wondering what that spike was, whether you pulled the whole string out and then reinserted it.
No, that was an experiment to see if adding water would fix a data issue that you and Kenji had talked about.
But one notable thing is that the temperatures here are actually slightly lower than the ones in the D2. Yeah. So that's sort of an interesting finding. The reason for that, I have no idea.
What's the separation between the holes?
It's probably less than 50 meters. They're not that far apart. Although this one in elevation is probably, say, 20, 30 feet sort of lower. And again, this is just the very beginning of the data, so all we can do is speculate about it at the moment. But still, the major finding, though, is that we're not seeing any indication that we have permafrost in this region. And that was something that we did not know before. So this is sort of significant new data in that respect alone. The hope is that we'll be able to keep these strings in and monitoring for the next several months. What would be ideal would be to watch this temperature as it evolves over a full seasonal cycle. But this really will serve as baseline data for future studies to look at impacts of climate change, and that was really our objective in collecting this information.
You know, there's other facilities that have been built on the summit. Is there any attempt or ability to go through their construction data or coring data and see if they came across permafrost?
We have not been able to locate any information on the earlier geotechnical cores. frequently what happens, and particularly an isolated area like this, the company basically will take the core back, do their testing on it, and then dispose of it. And with the drilling here, we were very anxious to make sure that the core was preserved, and we developed a library of what the conditions are.
Because, you know, like the Kex, I would hope the Kex and Subaru and Gemini would have
They may have
construction
taken them.
data.
Well, they would have the
still
data,
relevant.
they might have some minimal description.
Yeah.
But likely that information would be held by the engineering company
Yeah.
that took them. And I don't know what the prognosis is for getting that information.
Well, maybe
out
if
of
the Environment Committee has a nice enough letterhead, they could request a
Certainly would be
literature,
worth
a
it.
library search
No. No.
by the engineering company for that.
No.
If there is permafrost, what would that mean for the TMT construction?
I don't know. I'm just getting data.
Yeah.
I'll leave it up to other people to decide what this, significance would be in terms of the construction and the engineering. Really, my interest was in making sure that if we could get that information from these holes, it was a source of angst in our earlier discussions about permafrost that this had not been ever done before, with the exception of Al Woodcock's work. Al Woodcock, back in the 1970s, collected some data from one hole, and I believe that hole is still open. Is that correct? Or?
There are actually several holes, but yeah,
Okay.
they mostly collapsed. We tried to, because he found permafrost as you said, in the late 60s, early 70s in Vacu and a few other sites. Put in a couple of holes, and we about 2 meters down was as far as we were able to get to go down in those existing holes.
Yeah, we were fortunate in that they did put casing in. We asked them to leave one additional hole open for us to monitor that was also in the same depth range, and by the time we got up there to try to put a thermistor string in, it had already collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
So the formation, at least the shallow formation in some of these holes is pretty unstable. And so we were fortunate that the 2 holes that we had were left, the casing was left in the hole. We'll be able to monitor at least for the immediate and foreseeable future.
And then who exactly is doing the drilling and doing the project? I'm a little confused that Fritz is there, or is it?
Well,
possible-
The TMT did geotechnical survey work, and so they put in boreholes under a DLNR permission. But at this point, they left 2 casings in place, and so that's where the thermistor strings that Don is referring to. So they were put in by TMT back in September, October, and they're still there. Everything else they took out, and then once construction begins, these will come out as well.
And then you and Don are doing these temperature?
Yeah, Don is doing the temperature. He has the equipment to do the temperature work.
I'm working with a fellow from University of Alaska who is an expert in permafrost. And again, this was one of the topics that we discussed back as we were developing the management plan, as part of an understanding of the hydrology and the hydrologic system up within the summit region. The existence of permafrost up there will impact the hydrology. And we, like many of these other things, we had very little data on the extent of permafrost and where it was located. And one of the strategies that we elected to pursue was, if there was to be excavation or drilling, that we would use those as opportunities to go in and make these measurements to the extent that we can, so that we're not actually going up and drilling holes specifically to measure permafrost because there's damage associated with that.
Yeah.
But if there's excavation being done already, then we would basically go in and get that data and try to recover something scientifically valuable from whatever was being done.
Thank you, Don. Leave the lights off for just a minute. So any other, I guess that's a last of sort of the various research projects that are ongoing that had planned on.
Could you remind me, when you talked about the climate data, is Mauna Kea trying to get a climate network up there? Or is there approval for that, or what's
We don't have
that process?
approval for a network, but we are referring to it as a network because we don't want to, what we don't want to do is just put up a sensor or get weather data and not think about the context of the other instrumentation that's already out there or that ideally should be out there from a climatologist perspective and from the environmental side of things, either to understand vegetation change or other aspects of biology. So we're referring to it as a network in terms of designing it and thinking about to understand what are the different user groups, the people that use climate data, what would they actually use it for, why would they use it, what are the climatic processes that as we understand them, and where are their data gaps, precipitation at the summit being an obvious one. But where are their data gaps, looking at it a little more holistically, because it's from Tom's perspective, he's going to do this, he doesn't want to think about just one rain gauge, if that's all we're.
Yeah, no, I say this because we have a climate vegetation network, and Tom's a part of that group, and it's funded through ENDR, EPSCoR.
Yeah.
And it would be great to use the same methodology because we're actually co-monitoring climate and vegetation.
Yeah, so basically with that project, actually, got something from Tom today. I think over the next sort of 6 months or so, there'll probably be a couple of meetings. We can talk to the Watershed Alliance about having a discussion there, because that includes the Forest Service and BTA and Parker Ranch and Kukaio Ranch and Fish and Wildlife.
Because right now we have it going up the east side, and then we have sites on the west side, but we're missing.
Yeah, somewhat. And so this would be thinking about what of those stations, slope, elevation aspect, are essential, and then how do you fund that sustainably? 'Cause what Tom doesn't want to do is develop some great thing that someone like his Haleakala work, where then he's writing research proposals every 3 to 4 months to try and keep long-term monitoring going through short-term research, a series of short-term research proposals.
Have you been able to get access to the Mauna Loa Observatory, because they're doing a multitude of measurements, and we've done it for the last 50 years or more?
Yes, and this would include Mauna Loa. I mean, the geographic focus of this is sort of Mauna Kea, but from Tom's perspective, it's thinking about it, sort of understanding climatology at different scales. And definitely Mauna Loa as well as one of the best long-term records that there is when it comes to climate. And so taking advantage of that, but not doing not trying to do redundant work that isn't necessary. So jump back to the next thing up on the agenda was web page stuff. We obviously the web page is up. The main thing just wanted to mention is the library page right now looks like this. Let's see if I can find it. See if this works. So ultimately, this is still a test. There's some quirks depending on how you do it. It gets error messages. So ultimately, this will be, the library holdings, basically the library catalog will be online. Most of the documents will not be online. We don't have copyright permission. For those that we do have copyright permission, we'll slowly get them there. But ultimately, this is coming along. So it'll be nice. Then there'll be, all the sort of literature, the scientific and the popular publications about the library that we're aware of will be available online. We've had some great help, like Jim pointed out, that Al Woodcock's papers are in a museum, or I don't remember which university anymore, back somewhere back on the East Coast. That would be.
Well, he was UH, right?
He was at UA.
He was at, but his papers are in an archive in,
Oh,
on the,
yeah.
I don't remember the institute.
Woods Hole or?
Not Woods
No,
Hole.
it wasn't, it was some obscure little place.
Yeah. Anyway, there's some things like that that would be fun to chase down or
Yeah.
look into chasing down at a later date to see if there's more information. But hopefully someday soon we'll have more when it comes to library and sort of background information available for everybody on Mauna Kea. And before we turn the lights on, Amber, do you want to talk about, oops, get what I'm doing here. Place names and other GIS.
So for in the past I've presented 3D maps for outreach purposes, and we're still working on those and making those using different programs to see which ones will work out better. But those are coming along. And then also we compile the place names database where because too often we find that from our agency or other agencies that work closely with us on the mountain that we need to kind of have a standardized name system so that we can communicate efficiently with one another for different purposes like safety or just the rangers communicating with MKSS staff. So we've gathered the names from GNIS, the Geographic Names Information System. And also we have, and those are the red points, and then the blue points are our own points that we put, just like names of the cabins at HP or the ranger offices. So, and these will just help us in office use to better communicate with one another for various purposes. And we're working right now, it's gone through different updates so far. We've gone through with Kahuku Mauna, and we decided that the place names for the for Hawaiian names, that if they're a proper name, they're gonna put them together. For example, Mauna Kea, it would be together one word, the K lowercase, because it is a proper name. And if it was Mauna Kea with the space, it's like just any mountain that could be a white mountain. So that's what they've decided that they want, that they put it in red with that. So we're gonna try and transition with all of our brochures and all of those things to have those place names be used.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Amber. Otherwise, just a few more items. Our next volunteer effort is February 1st, if anyone's interested. Still looking for a speaker. I haven't sent the note out to the Environment Committee because I had a email fiasco in sending out the announcement, but February 1st is the next volunteer event. I'll send that, I'll try and get that out. I don't know if it'll be today, but maybe tomorrow, definitely tomorrow. I'll send that out to all of you. And then we'll be doing more through the year as well. That schedule those, we need to start figuring out the schedule for volunteer events through the rest of the year. The resource brochure, thank you everybody for comments. You know, we need to make a few changes like Amber alluded to with some naming things and some other structural stuff, but thanks Jim too for help in understanding whether the stone quarries are Hawaiiite or basalt or things like that. It was actually, I learned a lot, I appreciate it. And the resource orientation, one of the things the comprehensive management plan talked about was that we'd have a user orientation or a resource orientation. So the goal for 2013 was getting all the facilities, you know, the observatories, all the MKSS, OMKM staff, things like that. We pretty much did that. You never quite get 100% to staff in a given time frame. The staff come and go, but most places it's down to 1 or 2 people that they can name that started since the training. We did the training, or they were just out of the country or sick or whatever. So there'll always be those sort of few stragglers that we need to catch up with. But we're going to transition now to try and target the commercial tour operators. Will be the emphasis for this first half of the year, is trying to get all the Thyrocopa or Hawaii Forest and Trail so that everybody has the same baseline background information about the mountain. And then the other thing that we're doing with this and some of the invasive species documentation is putting it online so that TMT said that all of their operators, contractors, and everybody would have this user orientation before they go up the mountain the first time. That's a totally different scale than Wally, Ishibashi, and I going around to facilities once or twice in a year. And so this would be transitioning from an in-person session to something that's online. And we'll still, I still imagine we'll be doing some in-person sessions too. But if you're a equipment operator, if you're delivering water, we wouldn't have to actually see every person every time. There'd be a ways of catching people. They could do it on their schedule and still do it. We have to work out how do we verify that they actually took it and that they comprehended it, have a basic comprehension of the information that will be available online. Otherwise, conservation conference abstract deadline's coming up, so we need to talk a little bit about that. Jessica and Amber and I talked about how we might participate in that and figure that out, but we'll probably be at the conservation conference. If anyone has anything they'd like us, the reason mentioning is if you have anything you'd like to see us do at conservation conference, please let us know sooner rather than later, because the abstract deadline is the end of this month.
How do you?
The 24th, 23rd, something like that. Yeah, it's soon, a couple weeks. So, lastly, Jessica and Amber both came to us via the PIPES, the UH-HELO Pacific Internet Partnership in Exploring Science, or whatever that.
Pacific Internship for Exploring Science. Program
Program
for
for Exploring
Exploring
Science.
I got it wrong.
So, anyway, we're running out of office space for one, so typically what we're finding is it works well to partner with projects like Jesse, where the intern is, if Jesse is able to and willing, host the intern, or if somebody like Ryan and the erosion project, if they're willing to host a pipes intern. So we partner with people so the intern gets exposure with us and doing invasive species inspections and monitoring, which is a lot of what we do in the field, but then also with the science side, more that's the management side, then the science side with whatever the scientist is. And we're also trying to look into some archaeology, something similar from an archaeology side of things too. Don't know exactly what it'll look like in summer of 2014, but there'll be something. Probably a couple people, presumably.
So are you phasing out, or are you gonna stay?
No, we hope they stay.
Okay.
We hope they can stay.
Oh, good. Excellent.
So, otherwise, any other items besides scheduling a next meeting? Yeah.
Where are the notes available for the meeting? Do you have them on your website?
For the Environment Committee meeting?
Yes, this meeting.
We don't. We usually just send them out, and we don't take sort of detailed minutes. We just have a summary of points made.
Because if I come here, I'd like to have some sort of idea of what happens to suggestions that people make, and how we know whether that'll be followed up or not. Usually that's done during the notes.
Okay.
Good. I haven't been to a meeting in a long time where there weren't any notes taken. Maybe that's the way of doing it these days. I don't know.
Okay.
Is that the policy here?
No, I wouldn't. We don't record or transcribe, sort of, like at the Mauna Kea Management Board, where the meeting, Dawn transcribes and then tries to distill out the notes. Most of it is just Jessica or Amber and I. we're more of us, but, trying to do the meeting and take detailed notes at the same time, so we just try and make sure that we capture the main discussion points, and then ultimately the management board is more where, if there is something that we provide a summary, a meeting summary at the management board meetings, and if there is something, that's also a public meeting and an opportunity of something that we overlook and bringing up again, that, the public's welcome to speak up at those as well.
Excuse me, I have to go. Paul Stokhoff is retiring today, so if anyone wants to say goodbye to him, it's open if you're welcome to come up, starting in about 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
Yeah. See you guys next meeting.
This is sort of a long-range question, and maybe a little too soon to ask, but I see that you're working on decommissioning information so that you've got, data on what the building's footprint is like and
Yeah.
what everything is there. I would like to see us develop a set of criteria for deciding how decommissioning would proceed, what some of the decision points are with regard to how much to leave and how much to take out.
Yeah, no, that is definitely something that I think Stephanie's expecting that our office will be working on in this coming year, is getting into the nuts and bolts of what's involved, because I think it's, they've said it before, that CSO's future is is uncertain, likely to come to an end in the, I've heard various dates thrown around, but I wouldn't expect it to be much longer. So yeah, that's definitely something that I think we'll be working on in 2014. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
So Fritz, I know this is a little outside your arena, but does anybody here know what the water level is at Lake Waiau?
Yeah, I was
Has
gonna
it
ask
dried
too.
up yet?
I don't know. Yeah, I was gonna ask as well. I don't know if
So
the Rangers got out there.
Photo, let me see if I can find. So the Rangers take, because they're up there, and the DLNR has asked for help, however, then DLNR is not up there that often. The Rangers take a photo every 2 weeks now with water levels so low. The weather has been quite crummy recently, to put it politely. And so.
I won't let you up the road either.
But there's no bugs, so.
Oh.
They're getting
There you
blown
go.
around in the wind
Smart
and the rain too.
guy,
Yeah.
So they're,
trying to be efficient.
they haven't taken the
That's
January,
good for you.
they do it at the beginning of the month.
I worked in the lab for Christmas.
So and there's been a fair amount of precipitation since the mid-December.
Yeah, I was hoping December.
So presumably there'll be a little bit of a bump, but,
Do you have something for December or
yeah, I
November?
was just pulling up the photo time series here.
Well, that's the early one though.
Well, so that's 2012, I'll just
Yeah, yeah.
scroll down. These are just and Jim, if you want to, I think HVO is, and Donna Del Part, who was at UH Hilo, are working on a publication, if that's correct. But that's, so upper right, left is January 2012, sort of going, April 2012, May 2012, August 2012, September 2012, December 2012, then January 2013, remember that, skipping ahead here, that was December 2013, beginning of December, right there in the lower right. My guess is, and I haven't seen it, purely based on just the weather, is it'll be a slight bump in the water level, but it might be more like that, at best, that July photo is, and this is purely speculation, because I haven't been up there. I don't think the Rangers have made it. I don't know of anyone that.
The only thing I saw was one of them said there was slightly more. But the precipitation, if you want to base the wintertime precipitation on how many times snow has been plowed up on the mountain, we have yet to plow any snow this year. And we haven't, in the last few years, we've plowed that much. Based on records from prior years, basically for about, since when it started, since the time the lake started shrinking. There's been an obvious lack of winter precipitation based on that.
It's a good weather gauge, how often you plow.
Yeah.
So who does Donna work for?
Well, Donna Delpart was a professor here at UH Hilo in the geography department, and she moved to Idaho State University about a year ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like almost exactly a year.
So
It's January.
she, you know, she had been working with DLNR on that, and, you know, HBO has been involved. They've written a couple of volcano watch articles. I don't know if do you have any more to add, Jim?
We have a paper in draft form for EOS, it's the American Geophysical Union newspaper. Come out sometime probably early to mid 2014. But I don't know what's happening right now. Doesn't look good.
Presumably the next vote of the Rangers, you know, once the weather improves enough that the Rangers aren't worried about ice blowing off building roofs and having
Yeah.
to deal with that one of them will get time to go for a walk.
But there's still water in December, right?
Yes, there's still water. It's based on Donna's calculation, which she's pretty adamant is a crude estimate because all the data models are from bathymetry when at this low and
It's inches now.
yeah. But it's,
Yeah.
you know, just a couple cubic meters of water. But there is still, as far as I know, it's never been completely dry.
We found a reference, unconfirmed mention that the lake went dry in 1860.
Oh, really?
But it's just some guy walking by, you know.
Yeah.
So you never know what that really means.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Okay. So we normally try and think about the next meeting at this point, roughly every other month.
6 inches. That's what I heard. 6 inches of
Which would
water.
put us into early March.
Meters is as much as a jacuzzi.
I don't know
That's what it's
if anybody has any thoughts about a meeting in March. So we 2 o'clock Thursdays seem to have worked well, but I wonder if there's some people that have consistently missed Thursday meetings too. Would it be easiest to just sort of send out a doodle poll?
These guys are
Maybe? Okay, we'll do that for a couple of choices in March, in early March, and go from there. Okay. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Don't forget to grab a peppermint patty.
Yes, it's getting.
And if anybody wants to feed the spider, I brought some spider food.